Good morning, everyone. We're Team DNA, the data storytelling experts. First, we'd like to thank you, the Fat Cat Bank of Australia, for giving us the opportunity to share our AGSM6234 presentation with you this morning. We have our senior DNA consulting team here today. We've got Aria, Chris, myself, Danielle, and Mike. The problem you're looking to solve is that you are currently facing increased mortgage delinquency due to the higher interest rates currently charged by the Reserve Bank of Australia. And we appreciate mortgage delinquency is a situation any bank and, of course, customers will want to avoid. You're looking for early warning signs that the RBA will be adjusting rates, and this knowledge will then afford you time to review your loan-to-value ratios and other qualifying criteria before providing new loans, with the objective, of course, of reducing mortgage delinquency. And ethically speaking, we acknowledge that the results of this analysis won't always exclude people from obtaining a mortgage, but will help them secure a mortgage more consistent with their financial means. You mentioned in your brief you suspect changing oil prices might be a likely precursor of higher inflation, itself a precursor to RBA's interest rates adjustments. So our main focus has been to test the reality of this assumption. So do oil rates really impact inflation rates? And in turn, do inflation rates really impact interest rates? This led us to come up with two basic hypotheses. Hypothesis 1 investigates whether a change in oil price leads to a change in inflation. And we decided for this hypothesis to be true, the correlation must be statistically 80% or more. Hypothesis 2 investigates whether a change in inflation rates leads to a change in interest rates. Again, this hypothesis will be true if the correlation is statistically 80% or more. Okay, we're going to have a look at our data now, just to give you a brief insight. And given the scope of this problem, we've been really conscious to concentrate and utilise data and metrics which are completely impartial and not subject to any material bias. For comparisons with the Australian market, we looked at data from the USA and Europe. The time we're looking at is the past 2 decades, which was the best for sourcing comparable data. Oil prices came through the subscription-only data provider Trading on Economics, where we retrieved the oil prices from WTI and Brent. WTI is the benchmark price for oil in North America, and Brent is the benchmark for 3/4 of the global oil prices, except the USA. We also looked at Energy Insights by McKinsey, the Australian Institute of Petroleum. And then we had a look through monthly inflation data from Trading Economics again. Plus, we looked at interest rates, USA Federal Reserve, European Central Bank, and of course the Reserve Bank of Australia, the RBA. Now we're going to have a quick look at our methodology. Number 1 graph here relates to heat maps we created to ensure we didn't miss any time relational factors. So we tested the lag time between our 3 elements. In a single month, you wouldn't expect oil prices, inflation, and interest rates to change. So we tested these over a period of time. We didn't see too much here, but it was a good test for our data. So number 2, we compare locations, and then number 3, we group the variables together by country. Number 4, we ran our data through some distribution mapping just to test everything was okay. And then number 5, we did regression testing, which was having a look at the relationship between the variables against each other. We also created scaled values for selected graphs, and what this helped us do was compare distributions across the oil prices, inflation, and interest rates. Oil varies by tens and hundreds of dollars, whereas interest rates only vary by 0.25%. Scaling meant we could create some really great readable graphs. Okay, some of our observations and our hypotheses results. Here we have a look at the relationship between all of the variables, and we used regression testing for these. We were looking at a 95% confidence range, and as you can see in our oil versus inflation regression testing, we only came up with 21.1% Australia, 6.2% for Europe, and 10.8% for the USA. So what this was doing was testing the relationship of how inflation was impacted by oil prices. So negligible results. In these graphs, we have a look at how inflation impacts interest rates and what that relationship looks like. Again, we were looking for the 95% confidence range, and once again, we fell far short of that. Australia, 12.6%, Europe, 13.4%, and the USA, 8%. So almost no relationship whatsoever. Very surprising results and negligible results. When we're looking at this series of graphs, we're more looking at the trends and interesting patterns. We've marked in 4 of the major events of the past few decades: the resources boom, which was fueled by China, the GFC, COVID, and the war in Ukraine. And looking at the global oil prices, we can see that they all follow the same movements. So oil pricing, as this graph shows, is relatively uniform internationally. So these international events have exactly the same impact for everybody. When we have a look at inflation, similar results. When we consider the market pressures that cause inflation, the cost push and demand pull contributors, whether due to economic growth and contraction, or alternatively natural disasters or global events, all of these have an effect on an international level, resulting in similar inflation rates for our comparison reasons. Looking at the global chart for interest rates is really interesting. So there's even more significant variability. The trends are a little bit similar, most evident when there's an unanticipated global event such as the GFC or the COVID pandemic. But each region reacts to its own events with their own monetary policy in response. And we sort of see this variation. Interestingly enough, COVID and war in Ukraine, no matter what our monetary policy's been the last 20 years, we've all ended up exactly the same place. Okay, so when we overlay these variables for the individual regions, this is where we see a confirmation of the patterns already described. We see this little bit similar direction of oil pricing inflation, but interest rates, which is the green line, totally unrelated to the other two. And as we can see, that's almost the same when we look at Europe. Again, pretty much across the last 20 years, the green line is sort of running its own path. And again, the same in the USA, the green line, which is the interesting one, running its own path. So in summary, do oil prices affect inflation with a correlation of 80% or more? That hypothesis is no. So oil prices may have a limited impact on inflation over time, but really nothing that we can really rely on. So this hypothesis is false. So hypothesis number 2 result, again, it's a false hypothesis. Do changes in inflation lead to changes in interest rates with a correlation of 80% or more? No, they don't. Inflation does not have a clear impact on interest rates, which is very surprising. So out of this, we have a couple of recommendations. And we may want to know more about what causes inflation. So these could include consumer price index, black swan global events, economic growth and contraction, or unemployment rates. The other recommendation we have is to dig a bit deeper into what else impacts loan delinquency. We're all assuming it's interest rates, but it could be any of the aforementioned factors, or even a combination of them. Understanding this may resolve your original dilemma. We also recommend having a look at the aforementioned factors as well as consumer confidence and housing affordability. That is just about it. We're more than happy to come back and do a deeper dive presentation with your technical team. And we would like to thank you very much for having us. So Aria, Chris, myself, Danielle and Mike, thank you very much and have a great day.